Hello, welcome back to Carl and Rick Talk Risk. Rick, how are you?
Yo, I am unbelievably awesome.
On the
But
on the
also I have a bad hair day, so I gotta do the ponytail.
you're we're wearing almost the same color, but you're almost blending in with your background. It's just like
Yeah, I
almost a
know.
floating
I
head.
I don't know why I didn't get them to paint the door. Like I mean, and
Exactly.
by the way, I gotta point out to all our listeners, those are my wife's degrees behind me. They are not mine. Mine are on this wall.
Okay. Nobody's thinking you're trying to show off now, Rick. Thank you. Good clarification. Oh, well, Rick, I can tell you I'm sweltering. The Netherlands is hitting a new record high. I've got my feet up on my a cat tree that my cat is not using right now. So yeah, I'm boiling.
Well, I just came back from New York City, where again, relatively speaking, it was uh, much warmer than it is here in gorgeous Nova Scotia, where the temperature is just perfect. But yeah,
Yeah,
in New York City, not only can you get the heat, you get the humidity.
yeah.
And for all the New Yorkers listening, sorry, I just hate to say it, but man, you also get the armpit on the E train. And man, that is not a good combo. Not
Not
a
a,
good combo.
yeah, not a good way to start your day. Um, Rick, let's kick it off. You want to talk about one of my favorite subjects, financial independence, retire early, otherwise known as FIRE, which I don't know if we've ever spoken about on the podcast before, but let's do it today and get into it.
Yeah, well, I was reading the Globe and Mail, and one of Canada's national newspapers, or as we more affectionately call it, the Mop and Pail. And then an article on fire. And, the sole reason I read that was because of you, because I know that you're interested in fire. And, I'll let you explain more about fire, because I know that after I do this intro, you're just going to talk for the rest of the time. So, that's fine with me. I've got other work to do, so I'll get on with it. But one of the things that struck me about this article, and again, by the way, I de facto retired from industry early as well as part of a plan. It was always my plan to go into industry and then have a second career, a second retirement career going into academia, which, I wasn't quite as fanatical about it as you, but, I more or less planned for it as well. So I'm not knocking fire by any stretch of imagination.
Yeah.
But there's something very interesting about this. And of course, many of my friends are at the retirement age, and actually, many of them have retired. And what this article in the Globe and Mail brings out is that many of the people who retire early find out that, ooh, this is great. I've retired early. Oh, this sucks. I retired early. And what I took from that is imagining what your life is going to be like in your late 40s or, early 50s as a retiree. That is very, very, very hard to do when you are a working 20-year-old or, early 30-year-old, because you're in one context and you're envisioning a future context of which you have no experience.
Yeah.
And your only experience of it is from some, first off, what media is telling you, all those investment company retire early, or, you will
Yeah.
be walking hand in hand with your grandchild and feeling like the greatest grandparent in the world. When in reality, that isn't it. In fact, most of my peers who are retired, I shouldn't say most, but a much larger number than you would think, are miserable.
Okay.
And whereas I'm kind of, in many ways, living my best life. I got a job, I hope no one on faculty is listening to this or administration, but I got a job that basically I would almost pay to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not that I take my job lightly, but it's something that I genuinely, for the most part, it's not perfect, but I genuinely overall like. So here's my point, and this is why I thought it was interesting from a risk point of view, is when you're in one context, it's very hard to imagine what the future is like in a different context. And in risk management right now, and I realize that we're on different sides of what I'm going to say next, but you have a bunch of youngish, technically trained people
Yeah.
doing risk analysis for senior management, which they have no context for. Because when you're in senior management, not only do you have uh, a whole portfolio of objectives, not just the risk management one, you also have an entirely different data set,
Hmm.
which may or may not be amenable to risk management techniques. And you have a totally different context. And that I
Yeah.
see is one of the issues that we often underappreciate in risk management. We talked about the book, The Art of the Long View by Peter Schwartz before, and
Yeah.
that's why storytelling has to be a part of risk management. Anyhow,
Yeah.
I've talked way too much.
There's a
Go.
yeah.
Fire is your baby, not mine.
So fire away. Okay, hopefully that's the last bad pun. There's two things I want to jump in with right away. I think you're absolutely right. It's very hard to picture what our lives are going to look like in the future. And of course, one of the things we do to solve that is listen to perceived experts who are the retirement planners, financial planners that will offer to help us. You can go on the big banks' websites and they'll often have retirement calculators that you can use. And I've done this. You plug in all your numbers. Oh, I want to retire when I'm 55 and I want to have this much income. And you put in a bunch of assumptions and they have some assumptions of their own that they keep a little bit hidden unless you look for them. And boom, a number pops out. That number is how much worth of assets you need to retire. And it is staggering. It is 3 million, 4 million Canadian dollars. It's huge. And I think that's deliberate. And I think it's driven somewhat by all of the assumptions they make, because then you need their help, right? It's intimidating. And of course, I really need help to get there. And one more story, and it'll make sense why I like the fire idea, although I've found my own path since then. The other idea was I was early in my career. I'm sure, Rick, you can. I'm sure it's happened to you too. I was looking around. I was working in asset management, good field to start your career in, good money, good bonuses. In April and May of every year, everybody gets their bonus. It's normally pretty good. And you just see a bunch of new Mercedes and BMWs and Audis, brand new, sparkling in the parking lot. Just really nice. But there's a word for that. It's called lifestyle creep. As your income gets better, you think you're richer and you think, well, I can spend more this year. I'm making more. And I looked at that and I thought, well, I mean, I did the same. I fell for it too. I bought a new car 1 year after getting a bonus. But I thought, I don't have to live like that. I could live on the same amount of money that I was perfectly happy with before and let my income increase, and I'll have more savings that I can put away for retirement. And with the rise of index funds, low cost index funds that do very well, even against active managers, you can stock it away yourself, save up, and live a perfectly good retirement mathematically, right? All I'm talking about is all the mathematics that it's possible. A janitor can do it. Janitors have done it. It's not income specific. It's really how can you push your income above your expenses, push them in opposite directions. But what you're talking about is more lifestyle. are you really thinking about what you're going to do in the future? How are you going to feel? What are you going to want? What are you not going to want anymore? What are your healthcare costs going to be? All of these kind of decisions. And that is very, very tricky. We're not very good at picturing ourselves in the future. And yeah, I've seen what you say about risk managers, risk analysts, especially young mentors that sometimes ask me questions. And we've spoken a little bit about mentors. We've even had an interview, of somebody that was looking for some career advice. And yeah, the obsession early in your career is like, how do you use the models? How do you give black and white answers? And that's not what senior managers are looking for. They're looking for context. They're looking for the complexity that you often talk about, Rick. How do you connect the dots between all these things and make sense of the world? I feel like I've rambled a lot about everything, but FIRE really still excites me. I think we've done almost the same thing. At least I plan to do the same as you have done in your career, Rick. Find something more meaningful in a couple of years that I'm comfortable enough to then pursue, and not be in a pile of debts and not have options to pursue. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple things that pop out for me. First off, we understand time risk in the context of mathematical compounding. We don't understand time risk in the context of us as human beings, or as us as organizational beings in the context of risk. Secondly, we don't understand context risk. Okay? We're not very good at putting ourselves or our organizations in a different context. And contexts change all the time. There's one other thing, though, specific, and this isn't really risk related, but specific to FIRE. You've now got, it's not just you and your wife anymore. You've now got, a third member of your family. And the point is, or what I've observed, and what I observed relatively early in my career, one of the advantages I had was, I did a lot of work for the private bank. And so I saw literally some of the wealthiest families in the world. And people aspiring to be one of the wealthiest families in the world. What you realize, or what I realized, is $1 today is, in my opinion anyway, worth much more than $1 tomorrow. I'm not just talking about the time value of money. But let's just say, when you're 30 years old, the value of what you can buy with that dollar is significantly greater, even after accounting for the time value of money and inflation and all that other jazz. Yes, I'm a finance prof. I understand the math. Okay. But what $1 buys you when you're 30 years old, I would argue, is far greater than what that time value money adjusted dollar is going to buy you when you're 60 years old, or 70, and even more when you're 70 and 80. One of the things when I was 30, I was a complete mallaholic. Okay. Going into a mall was like, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. Now when I go into a mall, all I want is a nap. Okay. There's and it's not that I have everything in the world, but for me anyway, things don't matter as much. It's experiences, it's opportunities, it's, being able to light up your brain in a legal way, it's time to enjoy a good book and a fine Dominican product. That's what's valuable, not, the latest pair of sneakers, or, jeans that are now ripped in a new way,
Yeah, and you mentioned you mentioned my son, and of course, like I've seen that in how our vacationing has changed. It used to be, oh, we want to go to this new and exotic place we've never been to, and now it's really, where do we want to take him? Where is he going to have the most fun? Which, yeah, we didn't guess that life would change like that. So yeah, your context completely changes. We're kind of talking about a little bit of behavioral finance here, or at least some ideas that fit into
We're
it.
talking about behavioral finance, we're talking about sociological finance, but we're also talking about why I believe that risk managers should be readers of fiction.
Yeah.
I always tell my students, I've said this before here, that if you want to go into finance, if you want to go into risk, read Shakespeare.
Mm.
Because Shakespeare introduces you to the behavioral effects, the sociological effects. Uh, by reading fiction, that's the way that you get to learn about different contexts. Because fiction, by definition, is designed to take you into different contexts.
Yeah.
Also, I will read basically any biography that's put in front of me. I've
Yeah.
just finished source code on the plane back from New York City, Bill Gates's autobiography.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah, because I'm listening to both of us talk, and it almost sounds like the idea of diminishing returns at play. When it's kind of like making a life plan on your first sip of a you know delicious beer on a summer evening, and planning to have 10 beers a night for the rest of your life, but without tasting the second and third and fourth sip and realizing,
Yeah.
you've had the best. Maybe something else is in store.
Like when my sister, who's much older than me, 6 years, retired, ironically, as an academic, we celebrated that by going on a 2-week luxury cruise. And on that cruise, there were, first off, we were by far the youngest people there, even my sister and her husband. There's a bunch of people, significantly older than us, roughly, you know, we're in our 50s, she was 60. And they did nothing but go on these cruises. And, we went on this 2-week cruise, lovely cruise, very luxurious, top-notch food, the whole thing. By the fourth day, it was like, holy smokes, can I swim home? um, and the cruise was perfect. It was a river cruise. Every day, you're in a different city. Or I should say every day. Every other day, you're in a different city. You're exploring. They had lots of shore excursions. Lots and lots and lots to do. But it was like, okay, I could see myself doing this maybe once every 5 years.
Right.
But holy smokes, I would pay double to not be on the cruise.
Once you're on the cruise, yeah.
And again, nothing against the cruise. It was
Yeah.
perfect. It was delightful. The people were delightful. But my
Yeah.
God, you saw people just literally there paying to kill time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, planning for retirement, yes, money is part of it. Money is an important part of it. But planning your brain, planning your lifestyle, planning your body.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are, those things are much more important than the finances.
Exactly. And you really can't forget about your loved ones, including family and friends, in that bigger picture. Like, what's the point in being retired at 30 and all your friends are full-time at work and you have nobody to hang out with and do things with? That's a pretty stupid plan.
So, what I get from this is be very careful about applying financial models to something that's largely non-financial. Be very careful about applying models in context A to a totally different context B that you probably know very little about.
Yeah.
And 3, you got to be flexible
Got it.
because
Exactly.
as we all know, the old joke, if you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans.
Exactly. I want to finish on one thing. I'm reading a book that you recommended. I'm really enjoying it. Boom, Bust, and Echo. David Foote. It's two. Okay. Yeah. 2 authors. I'm so far getting out of it that the generations, it focuses largely on the generations and how to profit from that, where to invest and how cities are going to change and everything. But you just get this sense that I don't think everybody realizes that people, as they age into different cohorts, they kind of do the same things as previous generations did at that time. When they're 30, 35, they buy their first house, they get a bigger car. When they're empty nesters, they might downsize. There is largely consistency in how people behave over the course of their life. There might be some variation on particular sports and activities and so on, but not as much as people think. We're not as unique snowflakes as we like to believe, and that kind of ties into your advice on fiction. You really can learn from people that have been there before and lived a full life and what they did right. So
And
anyway.
autobiographies. By the
Yeah,
way,
and
this might, I'll just throw in my book recommendation for the week. And I realize that this one is controversial, and perhaps I'm enjoying it so much because of reading a very poorly written autobiography, although I suspect there's also a ghostwriter involved, whereas there's not with this. I realize that Boris Johnson is a very polarizing character, but his book Unleashed, um, it's a lot of fun to read.
yeah. Also an autobiography, of course.
It's
Yeah. Okay.
autobiography. Say what you want about Boris Johnson, the guy can write an interesting book, although it's a doorstopper. It really only flags in 1 or 2 places, in my opinion. His biography of Churchill, I thought was an awesome book. But anyhow,
Okay.
that's my book recommendation for the week. Boris Johnson Unleashed.
Nice. Okay. Rick, good chatting fire with you. And we'll talk to you again next week. Thanks,
Have
everybody,
fun.
for listening. Bye-bye.